Hi, I'm Jason Jaspersen. Welcome to my studio. This is the Helping Hands Project. It's for the city of St. James, Minnesota. They are starting an art walk along their main street. And so I'm honored to be one of the first sculptors in their art walk. When I bid this project, I proposed sort of different ranges of materials. And so bronze was one of those materials, cement was one. I believe I had a welded steel option. And so at the beginning of a project, I like to have a lot of options for people to consider. And so this became kind of an economical decision, but it also became a new adventure for me because I knew it was affordable, but I didn't know that much about how to work with it. Well, the initial challenge with any project is figuring out how it should look. That's the part where you're trying to make something out of nothing. Or, this doesn't exist. Nobody knows how this is going to look, not even the artist. And that's where you just get lost and you don't know what to do. So the concept is the hardest thing. The rest of it is kind of like, by comparison, rolling downhill in a wagon. It's a little scary, but it takes care of itself. If you were to work in a smaller scale, I guess plaster would be maybe the medium of choice. This is my model. The French word is maquette, but it really just means model, a miniature. And you can see, because I was under the gun, this is unfinished. I have drawings, I have this maquette, I have a lot of ideas up here, and most of that's happening in my head and developing in my head until the final project. To work on a smaller scale, I am a big fan of using materials that are readily available. There's kind of a democratic view that way. So the stuff that I used is not terribly hard to find. I bought some steel at the local steel and recycling place, and that forms the armature on the inside. And I got my concrete from a local big box store for building supplies. It's just regular mortar mix. No, it's stucco mix. So you can buy a bag of cement and follow the instructions for mixing. Probably wear a respirator mask because the cement is very caustic to skin. I have a family heritage in cement. My great-grandfather came to America from Denmark, and he moved eventually to Tyler, Minnesota, and started a cement drain tile plant. He used to hand sculpt drain tile, these sort of tubes that are now kind of plastic pipes that people put in their fields. So my grandfather inherited that business, and my uncle inherited that business, and I worked at the concrete plant as a young man. So cement is kind of a family heritage. That was an interesting thing, an interesting aspect of this project. I don't have a lot of firsthand experience sculpting cement. So, like many projects of mine, I had a lot to learn. I called my uncle one night. He's the one who owns the concrete plant, and I just wanted to pick his brain about cement. I wondered if he knew any mixes or just had any thoughts, any advice. And so he brought up some things I hadn't thought of, like weep holes in case frost or condensation ends up inside the sculpture. So I've engineered in some channels at the bottom end so that any condensation will run out. He was really hesitant though. He didn't want to give me any specific recipes or anything because he didn't feel like stucco was his specialty. But he tried to hook me up with a stucco master that he knew, somebody who would come and kind of coach me. That never really materialized, but in the age of YouTube, it's kind of like having a bunch of masters at your fingertips. And so it was, I did a lot of sitting and watching guys explain what they're doing as they're stuccoing houses. I'm not using anything really special. I like that. I like that you can buy these materials at just about any hardware store or a local lumber yard or something along those lines. There's something kind of democratic about that it doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. So I bought a stucco mix, cement, and I bought steel locally, and kind of mix to taste. I tried to make sure that I'm playing by the rules as far as how cement cures. You need to keep it wet as it cures, and make sure that your layers are going to stick together. I underestimated the amount of time it would take because this is, kind of a new process for me. And, my schedule gets filled up and so I was overdue on the date that we agreed on the contract. And so one of the major bumps was that I was found to be in breach of contract, and the city of St. James was upset about that. I tried to convince them that in 50 years, a couple weeks won't matter, but the quality really, really will. And so I try to always have a really long perspective. I want to make sure that I'm producing something that will have a lasting impact, that will be important for generations. So for me, it was far more important to be good than to be on time. Creatively, working with a deadline, I've found to be really, necessary. Everybody needs it, and for me, it sort of sets my schedule, sets my priorities. I have a list of projects that I'm doing, and I guess being busy has created a need for me to get really organized. I'm not a naturally organized person, but I have to become an organized person. So deadlines help me prioritize that. It's not always convenient, but one of my favorite artists is Chuck Close, and he kind of deals with this when he says, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. And so I try to think professionally about my work in the studio that I just need to work. I just need to come and do the work. Whether I feel like it or not, it has to get done. Well, to create this sculpture, we first had to bring in a boulder. This is a granite boulder that is kind of split face cut. It's got a nice kind of natural geometry to it. I really like the shape of the boulder. And that had to be here on site because the sculpture needs to fit it perfectly. And so Jesse Ellerbrook at Heritage Memorial got me the block and drilled holes in it. He drilled 4 pinholes in it that are about a 1/2 inch thick. And that allowed me to drop some rods in those holes and weld to those rods. So there's a steel armature that kind of plugs into the stone at 4 points. The armature builds up from those rods with angle iron, kind of going along the main length of the arms, and then it builds on the palm of the hand, and you see fingers kind of extending from the palm. Over the top of the welded angle iron is an expanded steel mesh, and that kind of catches the cement. And so there's kind of there's a hollow on the inside of it. I'm really stuccoing over that steel mesh, and that steel mesh grabs the cement. Like when I trowel it over that, it sort of squishes through and creates this sort of cement Velcro that is then tied to the steel. So the steel and the cement are intertwined at that point. The cement is then kind of built up layer by layer. I try to work the whole thing in one coat, and then I work the whole thing again in another coat, and I go over and over in the same way that somebody would stucco a house. I was really kind of looking to stucco as my workflow model. There's a scratch coat that you put on and you actually scratch, so that the next coat will bond with that scratch and link to it. I'm using an acrylic additive to my cement too, to make sure that everything's sticking real well together. It makes it more watertight and just less likely to delaminate, to flake off. Something special that I'm doing with this sculpture, I was experimenting with using dyes, with using color in the cement. And so each batch, I would kind of make a decision like a painter, almost like I'm mixing my paint. I would look at the sculpture and think about what kind of color it should have next. And I'm thinking about the layers, stacking layer on top of layer, knowing that I'm going to cut back through that and reveal some of those different colors. And it gave kind of a marbled surface. So inside of this sculpture, there's kind of a multicolored strata, almost like layers of stone. And then the last step was to stain the surface with some iron oxides mixed with water. It's the same stain that I was using in the cement, but it's now kind of layered over the outside, and then scrub back a little bit to reveal some of that multicolored integral color inside of the cement. Back in the welding stage of this process, I had my son Teddy work with me on kind of salvaging some metal and cutting pieces for me. So I would measure them out, and he actually helped with some of the calculations. We were trying to figure out how to cut the mesh, and so we needed to use some of his geometry knowledge to figure out the circumference. If we know the diameter of the circle, what's the circumference, and we start figuring out how to create a cylinder out of this mesh. So Teddy helped out with some of the steel work. My man Jesse Ellerbrook helped me out with the boulder, and he's going to help install. He's got the equipment. He's able to bring this stone in through the tall doors. with his boom truck and position it just right. That's what he does for a living. And besides that, he and I were sculpture majors together in college. And so every now and then he'd come in and we'd have a little critique session. And I really value his opinion. He kind of looks at it and thinks a little while, and he's able to tell me things that most other people don't see, don't realize, or can't put into words, because he speaks the language of form. And so he had this great suggestion really, really late in this process. I had sort of been kind of marbling these high contrast colors. The hands looked like koi fish, kind of these splotchy patterns. And I really liked that, but I had taken a step that sort of muted it. It made it kind of all cloudy and white. And the thing about this project is that there's no Control Z, there's no undo. It's a one-way street, so you're going to do something and it's going to forever be a part of that project. So Jesse was standing here and we were looking at this, and he was really interested in the multicolor thing, but I wasn't really into it, and he kind of was agreeing that it needs something. So he suggested that it maybe try a stain, kind of a watery stain, to just like mellow out all the colors a little bit so they weren't so high contrast. So we thought about that some more. It could be paint, it could be wood stain, but actually I had this cement stain, and when we look at the ingredients, it's really just 100% iron oxide with water. It's just like rusty water, concentrated. And that's what's dyeing the cement. So I mixed that up and started painting it on the surface, and that was risky. It felt a little bit, again, a one-way street. Once you commit to that, you can't take that off, really. So I jumped in, and I'm really glad I did, because that's another thing that I didn't see coming, that I was surprised by. I love the kind of iron earth tone that this is now. And I wouldn't have gotten that without the opinion of my friend Jesse. At the beginning of a project with a committee like this, we're often trying to figure out what our objective is. We're trying to figure out what to do. So the city of St. James had done a self-study, and they had found that one of their strengths as a community is volunteerism. They have a lot of people who will step forward to help out other people. And so the committee had an idea that they wanted something to represent that. They had shown me a sculpture that they kind of at first wanted me to replicate, and for legal reasons and also creative reasons, I couldn't just do that sculpture, because I could point exactly to where it was from. I know exactly that sculpture. So that was their side of like the foundation of this project. For me, years ago, I had this idea of a sundial park made of shadow puppet hand sculptures, so that at different hours of the day, the sun would line up and create shadow puppets from these different hands stationed around this park. So this was a concept that I had 10, 15 years ago. I've got sketches in my sketchbook somewhere. And I recalled that and kind of put that together with this idea of volunteerism and this sculpture of hands. And I asked them, what if we do something like this? A shadow puppet. And so then the job was trying to find, well, what's the right shadow puppet? Maybe an elephant doesn't communicate volunteerism, but I wondered about this idea of like a peace dove. And so, symbolism starts to emerge as you start getting a little bit into the project. You have a foothold on a concept, and then that kind of leads you to another concept. So if I knew that it was going to be about the shadows and the hands and the dove, this starts to sort of coalesce into something that now speaks to, can speak to diversity. It can speak to coming together from different places to have a unity. It can speak to light and dark, and the idea of mixing different colors into the concrete also brought in a new idea that it's kind of like the melting pot of America. This sculpture could be considered a portrait of America. That there's a lot of things coming together, and e pluribus unum, out of many, the one. Well, on the theme of not knowing, I really hope that this shadow works. I really hope it works. That would be great if the shadow actually works. My model worked in the sun, and that was a big reason why I built the model, because then I could test it. It's about the same angle, same rock relationship. It's just smaller. And so I took measurements directly from the model. Everything is, scaled up fairly accurately. Theoretically, the sun is going to hit this, and it's going to create this bird shadow.